national championship coming up. Is it too early to talk about next year's playoffs? Shh. Let's go. What's going on, everybody? It's me again, Golden Blue Dude. And if you haven't already, go ahead and hit the like and subscribe button. I do sports videos every single day. Usually they're college football, but college basketball is rolling around. This is going to be a college football video. I know. The national championship is next week, and I'm wanting to talk about next year's playoffs. What's wrong with me? Well, what's wrong with me is I'm obsessed with college football. That's what's wrong with me. And we all love the question, as soon as we can ask it, what will next year's playoffs looks like? Who from this year will be out, and who didn't make it this year will be in next year? Well, I think the first question is pretty obvious. I think Notre Dame will definitely miss the playoffs. That's not to say Alabama, Clemson, or Ohio State can miss it as well, because they will be losing their starting quarterbacks. Clemson is in good hands, though. Ungalale looks like a really good quarterback, so I'm not worried about them as much. And Alabama does Alabama. Ohio State, they're the ones I'm a little concerned on, especially what their defense looked like this year. But if they can get that fixed, then, of course, Ohio State will be back to the playoffs. Getting back to Notre Dame, I firmly believe Notre Dame will miss the playoffs next year. They did get a good transfer in Jack Cohn from Wisconsin. That's a pretty big pickup for Notre Dame. But their really key losses, quarterback Ian Book. He was a pretty good quarterback. He wasn't super dynamic, but he didn't throw many interceptions, that's for sure. They also lost defensive end Dalen Hayes, the linebacker Cora Mora, and two great offensive linemen. So their rushing game might take a hit next year. Let's look at Notre Dame's schedule real quick. At Florida State, home versus Toledo, home versus Purdue, a Chicago date with Wisconsin. That'll be interesting for Jack Cohn. Home against Cincinnati, at Virginia Tech, home against North Carolina, home against Navy, at Virginia, home against Georgia Tech, and at Stanford. They will be tested. The ones that really pop out is the North Carolina game, the Cincinnati game, and the Wisconsin game. Two of those are home. The other one's neutral, so that helps. But I see at least one loss in there, maybe two. And it will be enough to keep Notre Dame out of the playoffs next year, because if they get to the ACC Championship, they'll get beat again. That'll give them two losses at minimum. Sorry, Irish fans. No playoffs next year, but you're still going to have a successful season, depending on who you ask. So for me, that spot is guaranteed. No Notre Dame in next year's playoffs. The other three, still up in the air. So who could fill that one spot? Possibly another spot. Two teams pop into my head. The first team is Georgia. I think next year Georgia will be back with a vengeance, especially if JT Daniels comes back like he's hinting at. He's hinting that he will be back at Georgia. If he comes back, I have Georgia in the playoffs. They also get Javonte Wyatt, their great defensive end. He's going to be back, and the offense is going to be loaded. If JT Daniels does decide to come back, he's going to have a lot of weapons, including wide receivers George Pickens, Darius Jackson, Jermaine Burton, Arian Smith, Dominic Blaylock, and tight end Darnell Washington. Georgia might have one of the better offenses in the SEC next year. That's crazy to say. Of course, they recruit great. The number 3 recruiting class in 2021. Number 2 in the SEC. 5-star offensive tackle Amarius Mims. Then a bunch of 4 stars. Micah Morris, offensive tackle. Cornerback Nealon Green. Running back Lavase Carroll. He's a 4-star. Defensive end Jonathan Jefferson. Defensive tackle Tyrion Ingram Dawkins. And linebacker Chaz Chambliss. All 4 stars. And they have big frames. Georgia's going to be a big team next year. Let's look at their 2021 schedule. First game, right off the bat. A Charlotte game against Clemson. I think they can win that game. I really do. But if they lose that game, that's not a bad loss, and it's at the beginning of the season. Against UAB, of course, Florida in Jacksonville. I think they will definitely beat Florida next year. I think Florida will take a step back. home against Charleston Southern, at Georgia Tech, at Auburn. That could be tricky, but I don't think Auburn's going to be any good next year. Home against Arkansas, home against Kentucky, home against Missouri, home against South Carolina, at Tennessee, and at Vanderbilt. Some of those might not be in the right order, but that's who they're playing. I think Georgia is going to be a playoff team in 2021. The other team that I think could be or will be a playoff team, Oklahoma. This team finished the season on fire. Defensive coordinator Alex Grinch put the best Big 12 defense on the field this year. I think he'll do similar next year. Of course, their dynamic quarterback Spencer Rattler, he'll be back. He went 214 for 317, 67.5%, over 3,000 yards, 28 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, most of those in the beginning of the season. But it's actually going to be a quarterback battle because incoming 5-star dual threat quarterback Caleb Williams is amazing. That's not a bad problem to have. They have the number 10 recruiting class, number 1 in the Big 12. The big end, as I like to say, wide receiver Mario Williams, 5-star, and he comes at the right time because they do lose slot receiver Charleston Rambo. He's transferring, but that's okay. Mario Williams coming in. I don't think they'll miss a beat. And a bunch of 4-stars to go along with him. Wide receiver Billy Bowman, defensive end Clayton Smith, offensive tackle Davian Bird, defensive end Kelvin Gillian, wide receiver Cody Jackson, cornerback Latrell McCutcheon, defensive end Nathan Rollins, cornerback Damon Harmon, and cornerback Jorman Mutes. That's a great recruiting class. They're also getting back running back Kennedy Brooks, who opted out of the 2020. He's coming back. And defensive end Jalen Redmond. That's a big one right there. They also get wide receivers Theo Weiss and Drake Stoops. So they're going to be just fine on offense. And their offensive line is only going to be losing one starter. It's a big one. Creed Humphrey, their center, but it'll be a veteran, experienced offensive line. So that running game is going to be great. And Spencer Rattler or Caleb Williams will be well protected. Running back Ramondre Stevenson is going to the NFL. That's okay as well because, like I said, Kennedy Brooks is coming back. They do lose cornerback Trey Brown and defensive back Trey Norwood, but their defense should be just fine. They didn't lose all that much. The ones that have question marks that they're waiting on, offensive tackle Eric Swinson, linebacker Brian Mead, defensive tackle LaRon States, defensive end Ronnie Perkins, defensive lineman Perrion Winfrey, and linebacker John Michael Terry. Let's look at their 2021 schedule. It doesn't look bad. This is in no particular order because it hasn't been figured out. I'm just going to give you their opponents. At Tulane, home against Western Carolina, home against Nebraska, at Baylor, at Kansas State, home against TCU, home against Texas Tech, home against West Virginia, at Oklahoma State, Dallas against Texas, and home against Iowa State. So, a very favorable schedule for Oklahoma, along with a lot of talent coming back. Most of that great defense will be back. A veteran offensive line. Lost a few key parts, but a lot of great talent coming in. That's why I have Georgia and or Oklahoma making the playoffs next year. Notre Dame is definitely out. The question is, Alabama, Ohio State, or Clemson? Will one of those three miss the playoffs as well? And that first game between Georgia and Clemson could answer a lot of questions. We'll see. That's all I got for you for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on my next show.